Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
I still remember the day I decided to sell my townhouse like it was yesterday. It was a year ago, and I was more than ready to get out of that nightmare of an HOA community. I had learned the hard way that buying a house in an HOA was not all it was cracked up to be. I was young and naive when I bought my first house, and I didn't really understand what it meant to live in an HOA community. I thought it was just a fancy way of saying neighborhood or community. Boy, was I wrong. It turns out that the grumpy old lady across the street, who I'll call Karen, was the president of the HOA, and let me tell you, she took her job very seriously. Karen would constantly bother me about the smallest things. She would send me nasty notes about my garbage cans being out too early or my storm door being a problem. I mean, what's the big deal about a storm door? It had fallen off during a bad windstorm, and I was still waiting for the insurance company to fix it. But Karen would have none of it. She would show up at my doorstep unannounced and lecture me about how I was breaking the rules. One day, she proudly announced that she was the president of the HOA and that she could issue citations. I was like, okay, Karen, calm down. But she just wouldn't let up, and then I found out that she had almost run over my dog while drunk driving. That's a whole other story, but let's just say I was not a fan of Karen. Fast forward to when I decided to sell my townhouse. The main reason was because of a special assessment that the HOA had announced. They wanted to redo the roof and siding of all the townhouses, and they were going to charge each homeowner a hefty fee. I was speculating that the HOA was stealing money because somehow there was little money to pay for the assessment, and they were withholding financial information from the homeowners. I had no proof, just my gut feeling. The problem was that my closing date was before the assessment was complete, so I didn't have to make any payments towards it. But the HOA was being difficult, claiming that either I or the buyer had to pay the assessment in full prior to closing. I was like, what? That's not how it works. They were not giving anyone the option to pay monthly, which is what everyone else was offered. I knew it was BS because they couldn't calculate the final cost until the work was complete. When the assessment was first announced, I was given an estimate of around $25,000. But when I was trying to close, they came back with an estimate of $35,000. The buyer was obviously scared and nearly backed out of the sale. Luckily, my realtor and I were on top of it. We fired back at the HOA, claiming that this was all nonsense. We showed them the documentation they had sent to me for the assessment, and eventually they backed off. The sale was complete, and I was finally able to move out of that nightmare of a community. I'll never forget the feeling of relief when I handed over the keys to the new owner. I was finally free from the clutches of the HOA and Karen's constant nagging. I vowed never to live in an HOA community again. The stress and hassle just weren't worth it. Looking back, I realized that I was lucky to have gotten out of that situation relatively unscathed. I had heard horror stories from other homeowners in the community who had been taken advantage of by the HOA. Some had even lost their homes because they couldn't afford the special assessments. Living in that townhouse was like being in a bad sitcom, where every episode featured Karen finding something new to complain about. There was the time she threw a fit because my grass was half an inch too long. Seriously, who measures grass? Or the time she banged on my door at 7 a.m. on a Saturday to tell me my car was parked too close to the curb. It was like she had a sixth sense for minor infractions. Then there was the saga of the fence. My backyard fence had seen better days, and I wanted to replace it. I submitted the necessary paperwork to the HOA because, of course, you need permission to do anything. Weeks went by without a response. I followed up, and Karen told me they were still reviewing my request. Months passed, and my fence was still an eyesore. Finally, I took matters into my own hands and replaced it. The very next day, I received a violation notice from Karen. She was like a hawk, always watching, always ready to pounce. Karen's reign of terror extended beyond me. My neighbors had their own stories. The family next door had a kid who liked to draw with sidewalk chalk. Karen left a note on their door, citing some obscure rule about maintaining the aesthetic integrity of the community. She even called the cops on a teenager down the street for playing his music too loud at 3 p.m. on a Saturday. The kid's parents were furious, but Karen didn't care. She thrived on control and conflict. It wasn't just Karen. The entire HOA board seemed to be in cahoots. Meetings were a nightmare. They were supposed to be a place where residents could voice concerns and make decisions. Instead, they were a battleground where the board pushed their own agendas. Any dissent was quickly shut down. I once suggested we use some of the HOA funds to install a playground for the kids. The idea was dismissed without discussion. Instead, they decided to spend money on new no parking signs that no one asked for. When the special assessment was announced, it was the final straw. The board claimed it was necessary to maintain the property values, but I wasn't buying it. There had been whispers for years about financial mismanagement. The HOA dues were high, but the community looked run down. Where was the money going? No one knew, and the board wasn't telling. Transparency was non-existent. Selling the townhouse was a roller coaster. The buyer loved the place, but the looming assessment was a deal breaker. My realtor was a lifesaver. She knew the ins and outs of dealing with difficult HOAs. Together, we crafted a strategy. We documented every interaction, every misleading statement, every inflated estimate. We were ready for a fight. The final showdown with the HOA was intense. My realtor and I sat down with the board armed with our paperwork. Karen was there, of course, glaring at me like I was a criminal. We laid out our case, showing that the assessment process was flawed and unfair. At first, the board resisted. They tried to intimidate us, but we stood our ground. After hours of back and forth, they finally caved. The assessment issue was resolved, and the sale went through. Walking away from that closing table felt like shedding a heavy weight. I was free. Free from the constant stress, the absurd rules, and Karen's ever-watchful eye. I moved into a new place, a cozy house in a friendly neighborhood without an HOA. The sense of relief was overwhelming. No more worrying about the length of my grass or the placement of my garbage cans. I could breathe again. The experience taught me a lot. I learned the importance of doing thorough research before making a big decision. I learned to stand up for myself and not be bullied by petty power trippers. Most importantly, I learned that my peace of mind is priceless. No house, no matter how beautiful, is worth living in fear of a tyrannical HOA. Now, when I drive by my old neighborhood, I feel a mix of emotions. There's a sense of nostalgia because it was my first home. But there's also a sense of vindication. I got out. I escaped the madness. I see Karen sometimes, still patrolling the streets, still enforcing her rules. I don't envy her. I feel sorry for her. She's trapped in a cycle of control and conflict, unable to enjoy life. As for me, I'm happier than ever. I love my new home, my new neighborhood, and my newfound freedom. I've made great friends, and we look out for each other without the need for an oppressive HOA. We have block parties, help each other with home projects, and genuinely care about one another. It's a community in the true sense of the word, not a dictatorship disguised as one. I still keep in touch with some of my old neighbors. They tell me things haven't changed much. The HOA is still a mess, and Karen is still Karen. They ask me how I got out, and I tell them the truth. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I encourage them to do their research and explore their options. Life is too short to live in a constant state of anxiety. Selling my townhouse and leaving the HOA behind was one of the best decisions I've ever made. It wasn't just about getting away from Karen and her antics. It was about reclaiming my life and my happiness. I may have lost some money in the process, but I gained so much more. Peace of mind, freedom, and a sense of control over my own life. That's something no HOA can take away. F the HOA indeed. I don't understand how HOAs sucker so many people into their antics, especially in America. Almost everyone that doesn't live in a big city goes from ma and pa home to an apartment or college dorm, and once you're finically able to buy a home, it's ludicrous that anyone would go from living with controls and rules all their lives and literally sign themselves up to be punished and pay them to do it. HOAs might seem like it's a safe option to people who don't know better, but really they're one of two things. Either they're A, an elite force of Karens and Chads with narcissistic tendencies that need to exercise their authority, or B, a large corporation that has no reason to exist and only exists to leech off of the naive. HOAs need to be illegal, and towns, cities, villages, states need to more to enforce basic shit like noise violations. We pay too much in taxes for the elected officials to be let off the hook for their incompetence. The elected officials' offices literally hire subject matter experts to manage shit like this, and they lack competence as well. That's just not true. HOAs start charging homeowners for special assessments like this once the work is done. Or at least that's how it was in my situation. They had to actually determine what the final cost is before they can charge homeowners. I'm not sure if they had the company do work on T&M or a fixed cost contract, but homeowners were not charged until after all the work was complete. That said, since the closing date was before the work was complete, and before anyone got charged, I was not required to pay for it. I also made it very clear to the buyer before I even accepted the offer that there is a special assessment, and they have to pay for it. They will be the beneficiary of the updates so they can foot the bill. Of the joys of HOA life, you innocently buy your first house only to discover you've entered the seventh circle of suburban hell. Enter the neighborhood tyrant, sorry president, who has a special talent for harassing you about garbage cans and fallen storm doors. And let's not forget her other hobby, nearly running over your dog while drunk driving. Classic Karen. Then comes the pièce de résistance, the HOA's mystery assessment. Why not throw a surprise $25,000 bill into the mix? Oh wait, make that $35,000, because who doesn't love an extra $10,000 of financial anxiety? Of course, transparency is just a fairy tale here, with the HOA's financials as elusive as Karen's sobriety. As the closing date looms, the HOA decides to make your life even more delightful by demanding full payment of the assessment up front, contrary to their usual payment plans. But armed with your trusty realtor and a heap of receipts, you manage to fend off their nonsense and seal the deal. Congratulations on escaping the clutches of HOA hell. One thing's for sure, you'll never make the mistake of buying into an HOA again. Cheers to freedom, and as you so eloquently put it, F the HOA. Of the sweet, naive bliss of buying your first home, only to realize you've signed up for a front row seat in the theater of the absurd, starring your local HOA, who wouldn't want to pay good money for a home just to have a grumpy old neighbor play dictator with an inflated sense of importance. Welcome to HOAville, where the rules are arbitrary, the citations are plentiful, and the fun never stops. First, let's talk about the charm of having a self-appointed neighborhood watchdog. There's nothing quite like being lectured about your garbage cans and storm door by someone who acts like the fate of the world rests on their pristine curb appeal. Bonus points if they're also known for their late-night tipsy joy rides, safety first, right? Then there's the financial wizardry of the HOA. Special assessments appear out of nowhere, like magic. Need a new roof or siding? Here's a surprise bill for $25,000. Wait, make that $35,000 because we like to keep things interesting. Transparency, accountability, those are just words in the dictionary, not in HOA land. Of course, when it's time to sell your house, the HOA pulls out all the stops to complicate the process. They demand full payment of that ever-mysterious assessment, despite offering monthly plans to everyone else. It's like they're auditioning for a role in a reality show called How to Make Home Selling Miserable. In hindsight, buying into an HOA was like signing up for a course in advanced masochism. Next time, opt for a home where you can leave your garbage cans out a minute too long without fear, where storm doors can fall without causing an international incident, and where neighborhood politics don't resemble a poorly written soap opera. Lesson learned: life is too short for HOAs.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.